Hello, and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie Spiker.
I'm Candace Wierzbowski.
And today I got to talk with Jenny Dittmar of Dittmar Family Farms in Kent County, Delaware. And at her farm, Jenny and her husband grow a lot of different produce and they raise a lot of different livestock. So they have a lot going on. They're very busy people, but Jenny took the time to sit down and talk to me. So, Candace, you ready to hear it?
I can't wait.
All right, let's get into it. Jenny, welcome to the Farmhouse. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I know based on looking at your website that you did not grow up in agriculture. So can you tell me what led you to starting Dittmar Family Farms? And can you also just tell me a little bit about what you guys do there?
Sure. So really, my husband was the one who grew up in agriculture. I never, ever imagined being in the field that I'm in right now. I think it was probably ordained. I would never have picked it myself, but it's amazing how well it's really worked for us. So when my husband and I met about 11 years ago, my husband was doing factory work and working as a mechanic, and he was going from job to job. But I noticed he really was geared toward farming, but I don't think he realized it. He always loved having a garden and having livestock and having chickens. And he grew up in a community near Madison, Wisconsin. It's like a small farming community, and both his father and grandfather worked for large farms. So it was kind of ingrained in him, I think. And he worked on a dairy farm and he raised cattle for FFA as a teenager. But I don't think he ever considered having a farm. And I think the stereotype that my generation really seemed to be prevalent was that farming is way too expensive to get into. For me, my family history with farming, I think it skipped a generation. My grandparents were involved in farming, but not my parents. My mom's family had a dairy farm in northern Pennsylvania, North Pocono area. And they sold the farm when my mom was quite young. And my mom would always tell me, oh, you don't ever want to be a farmer. She did see a lot of hard things growing up and financially, but it started when we were engaged. My husband wanted to grow the flowers for our wedding. And I was I was just stressed out. I was like, no, that's not a good idea. But he pulled out a seed catalog and he, picked, I told him I wanted sunflowers. That was what I wanted for the wedding. And he was like, oh, that's an easy one. And he's like, well, we germinate them on this date and, transplant them on this date. We'll have them in bloom right at the perfect time. And I'm like, how do you know that? Why? And it turned out so perfectly. It was nerve-wracking because I was like, well, how do you know these are going to bloom on our wedding day? But he knew what he was doing so well that the florist that did the arrangements for our wedding wanted to buy them from us. And so I was like, hey, do you want to start a side hustle? And I encouraged him to start growing more things. So it's funny, Zach and I have a joke about whose idea it was to start the farm. And I think if it weren't for my encouragement and my feminine charms, we probably wouldn't have a farm. But without his scientific background and his soil knowledge and things like that, we definitely wouldn't be where we are. So it's a nice combination between the two of us, I think.
Yeah, so do you want to just tell me a little bit kind of what your farm is now?
So currently we are raising cattle, sheep, and hogs for meat on about 15 acres of pasture. We also grow about 30 different vegetables on about 3 to 4 acres at a time. And we grow vegetables primarily for 4 farmers markets throughout the season. We also grow for some restaurants that are down at the beaches in Lewis and Rehoboth. And we also have a small CSA program of about 30 to 50 members each year. And that's what really helps us get through the winter for the most part.
Yeah, no. I mean, you have a lot going on, and we're going to kind of get to all of those different aspects as we go on. So I did some research and was reading a bunch of the very detailed tidbits on your website about how you guys deal with your soil. And the one thing that really interested me is you said you're focused on building a soil food web. So can you explain a little bit what that means and, how do you even build one?
Well, I can definitely tell you the more layman's term way that we do that. So the type of farming practices that we try to adhere to are very regenerative or biointensive. The main principles that we follow would be very minimal to low tillage, because we try not to kill any of the living organisms that are in the soil. We've seen that if you take care of the soil tends to take care of the plants for you. So you don't have to do, a lot to help that out. So we utilize primarily mushroom compost for our fertilizer, in addition to the livestock that we have grazing. And we try not to add much additional fertilizer unless, the soil tests say that we need to add a little bit. And we also try not to use any chemical pesticide or herbicide. The other tenets that we use that are part of regenerative agriculture would be keeping the soil covered at all times. So not having any bare soil exposed. So there's no carbon, going back up into the atmosphere when you do that. So we try to always have something in the ground, whether it's a cover crop or a for-profit crop.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have pasture growing or hay growing, or if it's a high tunnel, for example, that we're growing in, we might stale bed it for about a month between crops just to try to suppress the weeds. But then we'll cover it with landscape fabric and plant in it. So we're always very quickly turning the soil. It's very intensive. Like we go from maybe 3 to 5 crops in the same space per season. And we try to keep a large diversity of crops. So we don't monocrop ever.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. I feel like a lot of agriculture nowadays is the like kind of monoculture cropping, and you talk on your website about always focusing on polyculture cropping. So can you kind of explain how that works? Because I feel like that's very different than where a lot of ag is today.
It's true. Yeah. I think it's easier to do on a small scale. I think if we were large scale, I definitely understand, why our agriculture has gone in that direction. But it's really horrible for the soil. The microorganisms need a variety of things to eat, as well as, you start to develop a lot of disease issues in the soil. And your crops aren't going to do as well without help if they don't have a lot of, other micronutrients and microorganisms. It's like a whole ecosystem down there, just as it is above the soil. So we've learned that, if we have a lot of different crops in the soil, that, it helps that ecosystem.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about, you mentioned you raise a bunch of different livestock, a pretty good variety. So first of all, how do you actually keep up with all of it? Because I believe you're pretty much all pastured as well. So there's a whole like system that goes into grazing, and now you have multiple types of livestock that you have to be doing this system with. So how do you make that all work?
It's not easy. I will be very honest with that, and especially being a new and beginning farmer and not having a background in farming and not being a multitasker like my husband is. I think I've struggled with that more. So backstory, I was a social worker before I became a farmer. And for the first probably 3 to 5 years that, I started helping out on the farm, I was just in this constant state of, wow, being a farmer is so hard. It's definitely gotten a lot easier over the years. We have started implementing more systems, as we've slowly added more infrastructure, underground irrigation being one big thing, so we don't have to carry buckets and trailers of water out to all the different animals. Initially, we wanted the model of a full diet farm. That was part of the reason why we decided to do what we did, and also for a lot of health reasons. Personally, and within our family, we've realized that we have a lot of food allergies. Could be because of the chemicals in the food. We've really wanted to eat chemical-free food ourselves, and we realized, wow, this food tastes so much better than the stuff you can buy in the grocery store. So we were like, okay, well, what else can we raise? What else can we provide? And with a CSA model, we really wanted to try to provide as much of the food pyramid as we could for our customers. And we also realized growing vegetables and raising meat, they really do go hand in hand in terms of the soil. You really have to have livestock in order to grow vegetables well. But we've realized we need to do it on a small scale in order to manage it all. And we've also had to get rid of a few things and really focus in on a few areas that we're really good at or that are more profitable instead of trying to do everything. When we started, we were raising goats, we were raising chickens and turkeys and rabbits, along with pigs, and then we added cattle a few years later. So we were a little scattered at first, but I think we needed to try all the different things until we figured out what we enjoy the most and what does, fit the best with our system. And we came to the conclusion that raising cattle and breeding cattle is something that we both really enjoy. And then also raising pigs, something we could do. We don't necessarily have to breed the pigs. We can buy in, stockers and raise them for 3 to 6 months of the season and then butcher them and then be done with them for the year. And same thing with sheep. We raised sheep for probably 6 or 7 years and we loved it. And we got really good at it, I think. But we came to the conclusion, actually last year, that we'd rather not breed them. We would rather just bring them in as lambs and raise them up until they're full grown instead of breeding them because of the timing of everything. Because usually they're giving birth in March, April, and that's also when we need to get a lot of our crops in the ground. And we also looked at the cost analysis on like an acre. So an acre of sheep, we maybe average $10,000 or $20,000 a year on that, amount of sheep that we could raise in that area. But on an acre of vegetables, we were getting close to $70,000 or $80,000 for that same amount of space. Huge difference. So realize, okay, in order to pay the bills, we need to start making this make more sense.
It's interesting how, there's been, it seems like a little bit of almost trial and error and figuring out what really works for you. I mean, obviously starting a farm is such a risk in itself. And then you kind of have to figure out what works best for you. But so it seems like you've definitely found your niche. That's for sure.
It was a little touch and go there. Probably the first 5 years trying to figure that out. We did a lot of reading and talking to a lot of farmers, and they said a lot of the same things, that you just have to find your niche, and once you finally figure that out, then you're golden. We passed that 5 to 7 year mark, and I think things are starting to really come together.
Good. So let's talk a little bit more on the produce side. So your CSA program, do you still do the it's like a membership program, right? So it's a little different than some CSA programs where, you are a member, you get a box and you leave, but yours is a little different where you kind of just have a weekly amount that you can spend. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, this is something new we're starting for 2025. Instead of calling it CSA or community supported agriculture, we're calling it farm memberships. So a family will pay a set amount for the whole year, and they can come at least, well, they can come once a week and they can get $50 worth of produce. I found that over the years, filling the boxes every week, that definitely takes a lot of labor. And also, it requires the customer to give me a heads up and say, oh, I'm out of town this week, so I won't be here. So cancel my box for the week. And also, so we started with the CSA model. That was really the model that really drew us to farming, realizing that you can provide for your local community and just grow only local food, but also have a customer base that helps you every season during the slow times to provide the supplies and the seeds for the year. And also, how many people you're growing for. So you don't have to worry about having a lot of waste. And that was really appealing to us. But as we slowly started growing our CSA, we realized that people in Delaware aren't really accustomed to eating that way. And it was a little bit of a hard marketing proposition to get people to buy into that and to pay upfront for their food. We've seen over the years that a farmer's market style is much more appealing to people in this area. It seems like farmers markets are really part of our culture here. And we realized, wow, I think we're making a lot more money from farmers markets than we are from CSA, even though we had hoped to really be a CSA farm. We've had to sort of evolve with our customers, and I hope that that's what we're doing by creating the membership. I think it does provide an opportunity for people to save a lot of money on produce and start buying all year round instead of just during the busy season. We used to do either a 12-week share where they would come just May, June, July. And then we started adding fall, and then we started adding winter as we've been able to extend our growing season more and more. But with this option, they can literally use the membership, any week of the year. So they can eat now, when we have carrots, turnips, and spinach, but then also in the summertime when we have probably 15 or 20 different things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a nice option where it's also giving your customers a little more freedom of what they get, while I will fully admit, and I've said it on our podcast before, I'm a bit of a picky eater. So, if you just get handed a box of vegetables, like, oh, like I don't really like everything in there. So I would think maybe this will encourage more people because you can pick, okay, I know I like carrots. I know I like spinach. You can have a bit more of a say in the produce you're ending up with.
The feedback that we received from a lot of our customers is there was either the adventurous type who just wanted to be surprised every week and was willing to try and use just about anything that we gave them. But then there was the flip side where another 50% of our customers were like, oh, I really don't like turnips, or I really only want tomatoes and lettuce and carrots. And this way they can only get what they want and when they want and how many that they might want. They can get multiples of the same items instead of getting one of 6 different things that we might have. So I hope that it does provide that flexibility. I was a little sad at first because the CSA wasn't working out as well as we'd hoped, because we saw the numbers kept rising up until 2020, and it just went out of control in 2020. But then every year afterwards, it's just slowly gone down until a point where it's like, well, the hours I'm spending on filling the bags every week is not justifying what we're making from it. So we have to make some changes. And we were considering getting rid of it altogether. But then we came up with this idea. I'll give my husband credit for this idea. So if it works out well.
I mean, I guess so much of farming, especially on a small scale, is following consumer trends. So it makes sense to kind of shift to a model that you're seeing makes more sense for your customer base. On top of everything we've already talked about, I saw on your website that you also sell like skin cream products, and you use honey that I guess you also have a bee operation. So like, first of all, how did you even get into shifting into that realm of beekeeping and making skin products? Or was it a goal from the beginning that you wanted to like have value added products and have like a wide variety of things?
Well, it started actually as a way to supplement our income during the off season. And it just was sort of happenstance because at the time we had goats and I was trying to figure out what to do with all the milk that we had.
Hmm.
And I had done a lot of research on, making soap and things like that with goat's milk. At the time, I personally wanted to try goat milk soap because I had a lot of dry skin or eczema or different skincare issues. And I just gave it a try one day. I saw that there was a class available through the county Parks and Rec on how to make your own soap. And I'm like, okay, perfect. I'm just going to sign up and see what happens. Just grew from there. I tried selling some of it at the farmer's market. I had just kind of experimented with it over the winter and gave it a try. And it sold really well. And people were really excited, that I wasn't using any dyes or any, fragrances or things like that. And I started to see there's a lot of people like me that are looking for something natural and things like that. So it just kind of kept going from there. It got to a point where I wasn't really having enough time anymore to make it, to sell, and a lot of people were sad about it. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep doing small batches of it and just do it in the wintertime. It helps because I'm a very left-brained person, and I really enjoy the artistic side of farming. That's really what my passion is. So that's really helped me, fulfill that need that I have. And also, it helps me a lot personally. So I have to make it for myself anyway. So why not make it, a little bit extra?
So you do have bees though as well at the farm. How did you get into that?
That was one of my husband's things. He is a honey junkie, I would say. Uh, it's funny. We got about a 5-gallon bucket of honey that we extracted a few months ago. And it's already gone. And he's pretty much the only one using it. That's his personal stash. But yeah, he really enjoys keeping bees. I'm slowly working up to that. He wants me to help him with that, and I'm slowly working around to it. But oh wow, the honey is just amazing. I think the main reason we want to have bees is for the pollination aspect of it as well, just to add to the diversity in the ecosystem.
Yeah. What does being a woman in ag mean to you?
That's a very good question. At first, it felt very daunting. I would say it wasn't until we had our second child and I suddenly became a full-time farmer at that point out of necessity. So we didn't have to have a babysitter. Finally started to realize how important having more women in agriculture is, and just the unique mindset that we can bring to it. There was a quote that I heard a couple of years ago, and it really resonated with me. It was saying if you teach a man to farm, his family will never go hungry. But if you teach a woman to farm, the whole community will never go hungry.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. My husband didn't quite understand that quote. I don't think he saw it the same way I did. So I do think, men are really, they're ingrained in them is as a provider. And, they want to take care of their family, which is a very respectable thing. I think women, though, tend to be more mindful of other people, and, serving the community, I think, is a more of a value that we have. And I think that's a way that we can contribute to agriculture in a bigger way.
Yeah. No, I love that answer. That wraps it up here. That's all the questions I had for you. But thank you so much for joining me in the farmhouse and for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh, I loved hearing from Jenny about everything that she and her husband are up to. I mean, you were right. They are very busy people. And, one thing I enjoyed hearing about was kind of the journey they took to get to where they are today, how, they kind of almost experimented with what worked for them, like even with just livestock. And I always appreciate hearing from people who kind of had like a vague idea of where they were going, but, didn't know exactly how they were going to get there. I feel like that's how I've lived my life, where I graduated college with an English degree and I kind of sort of knew what I wanted to do with it, but not really. And so I've kind of just felt my way here, and
here
now,
you are.
Yeah, and I'm happy I made it here.
I mean, I feel like this is the perfect time to throw in producer Eric's famous quote, something along the lines of "take off before you finish building the plane," right?
I don't know if I love that quote sometimes, but yes, yeah, I agree.
But I mean, their plane is flying quite well now with all the, the livestock and their membership program with their CSA and everything. So I guess it worked.
And we love another CSA where you get to pick what you get.
Yeah, that is, to me, an amazing CSA model. And I would not be surprised if more farms don't go towards that in the future.
Yeah, I would think so. The other thing I liked hearing about was, the way she talked about learning to make her own soap and then selling it. And it just made me appreciate, how farmers, they're hustlers. They're always finding new ways to diversify. They're finding new profit streams. If I took that soap class, and admittedly, learning to make soap kind of sounds fun, I would learn to make soap and I'd maybe make some soap bars for myself, maybe to give some as gifts. And that would be it. I would never try to sell them or think hey, I could make a little profit on the side from this. And that's just kind of how farmers think. And I think it's very cool. They kind of have to, and it's admirable to have that kind of drive.
Yeah, that is true. I feel like every woman in ag we've talked to so far on this podcast has really been very driven in a way that I kind of wish I was more that way. I don't always think I have that drive, but it is very exciting to talk to all these different women who are just doing really cool things, like making soap just because,
Yeah. Their minds must be just constantly kind of going and seeking new avenues, and it's exciting to think about. All right, well, I think that's it for us today. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. If you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting us at the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Worzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Sophia Kurzius. The music is by Tin Bird Shadow.